Hello and welcome to Panther Legacies. My name is Coach Alonzo Webb, and it's my honor to introduce this month's featured Forever Panther, Dr. Clarissa Dudley. Caring for the most vulnerable members of our society, our children, takes commitment, kindness, patience, and creativity. Clarissa's career has been dedicated to caring for those who are underserved. Her desire to help and her selflessness were both qualities that she developed during her time at Pitt. Although I did not have the honor of coaching either Clarissa or our moderator, Dr. Allison Murphy, I was aware of their tremendous abilities. Clarissa's story is one of inspiration and success. I hope our student athletes benefit from her experience and expertise. She is a great example of determining your own path in life and embracing opportunities that come along. We hope you enjoy this conversation, and hail to Pitt.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Allison Murphy. I'm a former teammate of Dr. Clarissa Dudley, and I'll share a little bit more about that in a moment. But first, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Clarissa Dudley. She is a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh with a bachelor's in Black Studies and Political Science, class of 1991. She's a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh Medical School, class of 1995. Currently, Dr. Dudley is the Associate Pediatric Clerkship Director at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. She's also a private practice pediatrician as a community outpatient pediatrician at Goldberg Center of Community Health. As I said, Dr. Dudley and I were teammates on the Pitt track and field team, a little while ago, back in the 80s and 90s. And when I was asked to do this, I was ecstatic. The first thing that came to my mind was, first of all, I love Pitt track and field, and I would do anything for my captain. Dr. Dudley is 1 year older than me. So when I was a freshman on the team, she was one of the upperclassmen. And I looked up to her as my captain, along with the other captains on the team as well. So one day, as I'm coming back to the dorms, I'd gone to the sub shop down the street. I forget the name of it. It might have been Sam's. And I got a sandwich because I was going to take Amtrak home the next day to go on break. It may have been for Thanksgiving break. And I had all my goodies for my train ride to go home because it's 10 hours between Pittsburgh and New York City on the train. So I had a lot of time to fill, and I needed not only a good book, I needed some music, and I needed food. So I came back to the dorm, and there were my captains sitting in his tower's lobby. And they could see me coming up the stairs through the glass windows. And I had this big smile on my face because I thought, oh, that's wonderful. I'm going to get to see them and say goodbye before we all go on break. And we've done with our classes, so we're just chill and hang out. As I looked through the window, all three of them got up and started walking towards the door. So they were coming towards me, and they caught me before I got into the building. And I was excited until I saw the expression on their face. And I thought, uh-oh. And I'm going to leave the other two captains out of this because, you know, they may want to run for president one day, and I'll leave their dirt behind the rug. But Captain Dudley and her teammates at the time decided that they wanted my sandwich more than I needed it. And they commenced to grabbing me by the knees, the ankles, and the waist, turning me upside down, putting me head first into a snowbank that had been plowed up against the window. And all I did was scream and eat snow. And when I came to and got back on my feet, they were laughing, running, and divvying up my sandwich. And I was perplexed.
I don't remember any of that, Allison. But I do want to say, hey, you know what? This is why we ate your sandwich if we allegedly ate your sandwich. Can you read that?
And that's exactly where it started. The track team was a family, and these were just my big sisters picking on their little sister out of nothing but love. Because what's a sandwich? It was over. But it's a friendship for a lifetime. And so that's why we're here, to hopefully impart to you what the Pitt legacy really is. And so I will turn it over to Dr. Captain of the Mafia, Dudley, at this time.
Once again, like I said, Allison, that was to teach you this valuable lesson that pain is temporary, pride is forever. I don't know if that's going to come out reversed on the other side. You know it, T5T, 91. And for you, your graduating year was?
93.
93. Pain is temporary, pride is forever. And those are some of the life lessons that we learned when we came through with our captains as well. And we tried to impart down to the freshmen and sophomores and juniors that were underneath us at the time. I might not advocate such, as described by my former teammate, such harsh treatment of others, as I believe in respecting other people's boundaries and space, especially these days. But the lessons that were learned were invaluable. And like Dr. Murphy said, we loved each other. Everything that we did for each other was done in love, and that love continues on to this day. So I want to take this time to especially thank Dr. Murphy for actually her leadership. She saw me as a captain, but I saw her as a leader. That's one of the things that I want to share with you guys, that you can be a leader no matter what your position is. And I learned as much as she learned from me. I probably learned twice as much from her. So I want to thank her and appreciate her for her leadership during that time as I was growing. But I also want to thank her for agreeing, not only her, but also Coach Webb for agreeing to be on a part of this panel today. So thank you, Allison.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And again, thank you, University of Pittsburgh. I have a question for you, Dr. Dudley. You had a non-traditional path to medical school. You started out as a Black Studies and Political Science major. Can you tell us what inspired you to go into medicine?
Yeah, so I'll have to rewind it back just a little bit to what inspired me to go into medicine, to back when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, maybe even younger than that. My father was in the military, and so that meant that I had access to healthcare. If my father was not in the military, I might not be a physician to this day, because I might not have had the same kind of access that was afforded to enlisted servicemen at the time. I went to the pediatrician's office often, and I just enjoyed being there. I'd say sometimes I was there because I was actually sick, and sometimes I was there just because I enjoyed being at the pediatric office. I loved watching what they did. I loved how they interacted with patients. I loved how they treated me as an individual, and they valued my opinions. And so I loved watching all that. And I knew from a very early age that this is the direction I wanted to go. I didn't know how I was going to get there at the time. No one in my family were in medicine, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So that's what actually sparked my interest. And then over time, excelling in sciences actually helped. And then once I got to Pitt, taking courses that would help permit me to apply to medical school was what set me on the path. Now, you said that I started out as a Black Studies and Political Science major. That's not exactly correct. I started out as a chemistry major or biology major, one of the two, because I had a ton of credits in biology and chemistry. And when I went up to my advising session, they said, here is your curriculum. This is what pre-medical students need to take. This is how many hours you need to take them. This is the way that you need to take them. Take these classes. And based on that, because you're taking this many biologies or chemistries, you can pick one of those as your major. And I said, okay, I guess that's the way things have to go. I actually came to Pitt on an honor scholarship as well. I came on an athletic scholarship. And we'll probably get into this a little bit later on, but Coach Lewis also made me take the SATs one more time so I could get a couple points higher to get that honors scholarship. Mostly so that he could divvy up that money that he didn't have to pay for me for the honors scholarship to some other athletes, which was fine with me. But I was in the honors college and went to the Cathedral of Learning, got my academic curriculum out, and proceeded to take all of those courses. My freshman year, first semester, I remember after my freshman year, first semester, coming home and bawling my eyes out because I was like, that's it. That's the end of my career. I'm never going to be a doctor now. I don't remember what my transcript was, but it wasn't good. Being a full-time athlete and a full-time student with all of those courses that they suggested that I take was super difficult for me. And it was not my path that I needed to proceed down in order to reach my goal. I didn't really realize that until I took a step back, collected myself, and said, I still want this goal. I'm still going to be a doctor. Nothing can stop me. Nothing can get into my way. It doesn't matter that I didn't do well my first semester. I'm going to think about things, reconfigure things. I'm going to go over this hurdle, not around this obstacle. I'm going to go over this hurdle and kind of figure out what I want to do. So I came back and said, well, look, maybe if I just spread my courses over the 4 years that I'm at Pitt, I'll be more successful. So if I don't take all my biology and chemistry at the same time, but I throw it in with something I actually enjoy, which was political science. I actually really loved political science. And I was interested in learning more about who my history is, because I hadn't learned that in high school. At the time, high schools didn't really teach you a lot about Black history. And that was the first time I had the opportunity to be exposed to information that taught me in detail about my history. And so that's when I transformed and became a Black Studies and political science major, because I started taking lots of courses that were related to that. I excelled in those courses. I excelled in the pre-matriculation courses as well, because I was happy. Like I was happy and they were spread out over time. And that allowed me to not only be a dedicated student, but also to fulfill all of the requirements, like running up that hill, going to the weight room, double time at Shenley, like all of those things, all the away trips that we had. Track is a full year sport, so it allowed me to actually fulfill the obligations of track and field, but also continue to do well in my coursework. And so that gives you a little bit about like what got me into thinking about going into medicine, and a little bit about like how it sometimes was challenging for me, but the ways that I was able to modify my schedule that fit me. Really, you have to figure out what is going to work best for you, and then kind of utilize those things that you're good at and place them in a space where you can be successful.
Wonderful, Dr. Dudley. I had the same experience in my first year of not performing as well academically as I expected, and not nearly as well as I did in high school. And so I think that that path is very similar for many athletes. And it's great to know that we can be an example, that you can still reach your goals even when you have a little bit of a rocky start. Were there any professors at Pitt that were really impactful in your journey, whether it was during the undergrad years or the medical school years?
Oh my gosh, I was at Pitt for 8 years. There were so many. And in my undergraduate time, the Black Studies department, I'm sure you took a few of those courses. One of our teammates had a parent that was teaching one of those courses. That was the only course I actually didn't get a chance to take, the African dance class. But I do recall you guys, the whole team, taking it. Yes. And doing a phenomenal performance at the student center. But I recall Dr. Barbara Sizemore. That name stands out to me. She was a phenomenal educator that was at Pitt from, I believe, like 1975 to 1992, right after I left medical school. But she was at Pitt for an extensive period of time. But prior to that, she had done a lot of work on equity and trying to make sure young Black kids, whether you were from a high socioeconomic status or a low socioeconomic status, that you knew that you could be successful. And that planted the seeds for me she showed me in a rigorous way. She was academically rigorous. She did not let you get away with anything. I remember Monica was in our class. I'm going to shout out Monica a couple times on this video because she was in one of my classes, and Monica had some creative ways of gaining information. But she would tease me all the time about how I would cover up my paper and take my test, because Dr. Sizemore would often put me in charge of the class when she had to step out for something. So I remember Dr. Sizemore as one of the, or having a profound effect on me, but Dr. Anise, also in the Black Studies department, introducing me to the first ideas of decolonizing the mind. All of those things help like spark in me like curiosity and a passion for health, for equity. And it continued on to become health equity. But like at that time, it helped me to understand the struggles that had gone on before me and the struggles that would need to continue in order for us to be successful. And so those are two names from my undergraduate space that really stood out to me. And then in my graduate space, there was also so many. Dr. Rao was an anatomist who also, these are women who are rigorous. It's not like they're letting you get away with anything. They hold your feet to the fire and make sure. And I think that's when you have set high expectations for people, they will reach those expectations. If you have low expectations for people, they will reach those expectations. And I appreciated being at a place like Pitt where the women that I saw as role models were setting up very high expectations for their students, and we tried to meet those goals. So those are the ones that just come to mind generally.
And we were very comfortable with high expectations, starting with our coach, the late Steve Lewis. He created T5T, as Dr. Dudley showed you, that family that supported each other in reaching beyond our own expectations, other people's expectations of us, and actually reaching for more than the stars, the moon, the sun, and anything that you wanted. He had high expectations for us. And I remember being an athlete and finding my way. I changed my major a few times at Pitt before I landed on my career. But I also remember Dr. Dudley wasn't the only one on the path to medical school. I was being mentored by the upperclassmen that were also on their way to medical school and law school. And, you know, in the business arena, we have many, many successful people in corporate America that were teammates to us. Now looking back, Dr. Dudley, at who your teammates are, where they are in the world, do you have any funny stories to share about the people we used to be way back then?
Oh my goodness, where to start? I think I'll start, I'm not even sure, I'll start before you came, I think, or you might have been very impressionable at this time. You might have actually been there and been like, whoa, I won't do any of that. Like you might have learned from my mistakes by this. One thing that stands out, and then I'll go and I'll probably share some experiences as to when you actually were there. Yeah. So previously, and I thank you for mentioning Doctor. We want to call him Doctor because I felt like he knew all things and he had his PhD in life. We want to mention Coach Lewis. I'm glad that you mentioned Coach Lewis because even though he was not an educator in terms of like he didn't have a professorship, but I can tell you that out of all the people at the university, he's probably the one who has influenced me the most. And we were talking a little bit off camera a little bit before about how now I am certain that the student athletes that are working under Coach Webb feel exactly the same way, that they are getting more education from their exposure and experiences with their coaching staff than specifically Coach Webb, than they may even be getting in the classroom environment. So thank you, Allison, for bringing up Coach Lewis and his level of expectations for us. Having said that, one of his expectations for us, the reason why he created T5T, and maybe you can get into that a little bit later on, but the reason why we created T5T is because we wanted to show a brother and sisterhood. And he actually said that we could not join fraternities while we were there. And in the end, as I think back to it, I understand why. But at the time, as an 18 and 19-year-old, you're like, you can't tell me what to do. What do you mean? I'm going to do blah, blah, blah. This is something I really want to do. But at the time, he was trying to help us to balance all of the things that we had to do, right? But that T5T stands for track by track. And it's one of the things that he established to help keep us as a family. The other thing that he actually told us that we could not do, he was good at telling us things that we couldn't do. He told us that we could not go to Penn Relays one year. And I'm not sure if you were there this year, Allison, but the year that he told us we couldn't go to Penn Relays, we were like, we're out of classes. You can't tell me we can't go to Penn Relays. The team wasn't going to Penn Relays, so therefore nobody was supposed to go to Penn Relays. Me, Debbie Bonner, I remember, Luann, Pat Cupid, who hopefully you guys will also have as one of your legacies. She's also a doctor now down in Florida running the school systems down there. But we all decided he can't tell us what to do. We're going to Penn Relays. We went to Penn Relays, had ourselves a good time watching all the other teams run, came back, and we had a team meeting, bopped up the hill to his house. We thought we were just, I don't know. We just thought we were bigger than our britches. We got up there, sat in our spaces up front. Those team captains sat up front and we sat in the back like we were supposed to do. And he proceeded to say, you, get out of here. He kicked us off the team. And we were shocked because we just knew that we were the team. What do you mean kicking us off the team? But by using that, he was setting an example for us. Like, number one, that rules apply to everybody, no matter who you are, right? And that those expectations that he had for us were there for a reason. So that's the funny memory I remember about Coach Lewis. The funny memory I remember about Coach Lewis and the teammates that came before Allison, the ones that came during Allison's time. The funny memory, it's not really funny because I'm not going to say anything that I did to Allison. And as a matter of fact, I believe Allison, that crew, we were perplexed by that crew. It was you, it was Monica Hockaday, it was Ronnie Crumpler. You three came in blazing, right? And I think, was there one more?
Yes, Becky, but she didn't stay.
Yeah, Becky. That crew, they gave us, those were troubled children. We just obeyed. Like, we were like, okay, you want us to carry your blocks? Sure, I'll carry your blocks. Okay, you want my sandwich? Okay, here's my sandwich. Okay, you want to get in front of me in line? Sure, you can get me in line. These guys, they had some mouth. They talked back. They were like, they very reluctantly carried the blocks. They just were a lot to handle. One of the things when we actually had to handle them, though, was we had to take on leadership roles. And one of the leadership roles I recall, and I don't know, Allison, this isn't really that funny, but it is something that stuck in my mind about you guys. We were on a trip somewhere. It might have been Alabama or Tennessee or somewhere that we actually had to drive. So it wasn't Alabama. It might have been like Tennessee. And we had to drive there. And Coach Lewis was like, I'm tired. Dudley, you drive. And at the time, this is like a 16 passenger van, right? I'm like, I'm 20 years old, not even, 18, 19, 20 years old. Like, I'm 20 years old and I'm like, I can't be responsible for all these people. What up, I just can barely drive my little stick shift, but I was one of the only athletes that was driving at the time. So it was like, you drive. And having these knuckleheads in the background while you're trying to like concentrate and focus, and they're playing all kinds of crazy music and jumping up and down and being unruly was one of the times that I remember being terrified. But at the same time, when I look back at that memory, I think of it with a lot of fondness because it was one of the things that reminded me of the bonding experiences that we had on those long journeys to various track meets.
Nope, don't remember being a troublemaker in the back of the van.
Yes.
Can't confess to that one. However, we do share that story of being kicked off the team, as I was by the most loving man on the planet. Steve Lewis said, "You broke my rule, pledge of sorority, you're out of here."
Yep, but we learned a lot from it, right? And I think without those lessons that he was teaching us, we wouldn't be where we are today. So we appreciate being kicked off and then gently welcomed back in.
Absolutely. And it grew in our love for each other. It grew in our love for the university because that was our common bond, right? And we grew in respect for our coach and his position because, like you said, there was a part of us even at the time that knew he was right. And a part of us at the time knew that we want to do what we want to do right now, like go to Penn Relays when we weren't supposed to and pledge. And it's what families do. They disagree, they fight, and they never stop loving each other. And so that's a wonderful testament that we can all share. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about your time after you left Pitt, Dr. Dudley. You also have a master's in public health from Johns Hopkins. And I also know that you spent a lot of years of your practice, maybe at least some of the years of your practice as a pediatrician overseas, serving other communities. Can you talk about that time and what was your motivation for your international experiences?
The truth of the matter is that motivation came from Pitt. I actually, as a fourth-year medical student at Pitt Medical School, did a rotation in a place called Webuye, Kenya. It's about an 8-hour train ride outside of Nairobi, the capital there. From that experience, it was in a mission hospital with like 80 beds maybe, with 2 missionary doctors. It was my fourth year of medical school, but the missionary doctors had to go off and do something. So they left us, me and one of the other medical students, in charge of the hospital as fourth year medical students. We were on call every night. And that was the foundation that allowed me to know this is what I want to do. We got all kinds of calls for things. I'll never forget. We got a call for a little boy who had fallen off a roof. And we didn't have the fancy technology that we have, like CT scans and MRIs. And we only had very basic things like lumbar punctures, which is where you take a little needle and you stick it in their back to measure the pressure. You don't do that if you think that the pressure is elevated. But that's the only thing that we had to use. We had some pain medications that we could use to help this child. And then we had to send him to Nairobi on that 8-hour train ride back to get actual any kind of imaging studies that we needed to have done. But I remember just being also, again, terrified and waking up like I was awoken, and they gave me the information that this young man was here. And that whole night I stayed awake with him, kind of checking on his vital signs. Because that's all I could do, was to check his heart rate, check his blood pressure, and make sure that he was still alert and aware. And so from that foundation as a fourth year medical student, that's when I got the bug, or the notion that this is really what I want to do. I want to be in a space where I am serving underserved people. I want to be in a space where the resources are limited. I want to be doing medicine globally. At least that's what I thought at the time. It's also the place. It's also the time that I decided, oh, I also want to chop off all my hair, because I don't need, like, I saw beautiful children, little girls and little boys, but mostly the little girls with their hair short, and I wanted them to be able to see themselves in me. And so that's when I stopped perming my hair, and I started wearing my hair naturally at that time. And so from that time forward, this is how my hair has been. But it was during that Pitt Medical School time that the foundations for global health actually existed. And then once I actually had that foundation, I went on to residency training. I went to the University of Alabama for a residency at Children's Hospital of Alabama, did my residency training there. I got out and I decided, what do I want to do now? I know I want to do global health. I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but because at that time in 98, it wasn't like it is now. We were still like faxing information back and forth to people to tell them, hey, we're coming over to see you. But I knew at that time that that's something that I wanted to do. My classmates actually were very much staying in rote step, doing what we had learned in terms of most people, when you go into medicine, you do either primary care or you do a subspecialty, and that's just what you do. But I had learned from my time at Pitt and my time, like I said, as a military kid moving around from place to place, that I don't have to follow the beaten path. I can create my own pathway. And that's exactly what I did. I decided to do something called locum tenens. What locum tenens is you travel around, and this is locally, meaning in the United States. You travel around and you fill in for people. You fill in for physicians that are out on maternity leave, or you fill in for a physician who is sick, or fill in for a physician who's on vacation. It can go from like anywhere from 2 weeks up to 6 months or a year. you can fill in for people, but you were in charge of your own destiny there. You got to decide where you wanted to go in the country and how long you wanted to work. And so that's what I did for a while, working for 6 months at a time and then traveling abroad any way that I could. And then trying to work in resource limited settings, saving up enough money to pay for my travel and then work in those resource limited settings. I hooked up with a group called Journey for Children. They were a group of Vietnamese dentists and other social workers, engineers. Those folks I actually met through my residency program. One of the nurses, we became fast best friends because she wouldn't institute one of the orders that I had. I said, you need to do this to this baby in the neonatal intensive care unit. But I was at the time of a very junior, very freshman. I'm sorry, I was an intern. So my first year in residency, and I was like, you need to do this. And she was young herself too, but she actually had been doing nursing in the NICU for a long period of time. And she turned and looked at me and said, no, I'm not going to do that. And then we became fast friends. So she was Vietnamese, and her friend group actually helped us to kind of figure out a way to set up a small group that would go over and do kind of these small missions to different places. And so my very first travel was to the Philippines, to a Vietnamese refugee camp. And at the time, I had no idea that the Vietnamese actually went to the Philippines as refugees of the Vietnam War. They had gone there and still stayed there. And there were families and generations that were actually living in this Vietnamese refugee camp. We went there and gave them service for their dental care and dental injuries. And my job at the time was to screen them to make sure that they were healthy enough to receive those dental services. And also if we identified anything that was unusual, to refer those things out. And we definitely identified lots of things that hadn't been seen by a physician before. So that was my first foray into international travel. And I did that for a couple of years, like trying to figure out, like, I'm going to work, make some money, do some global health and work. But then after a while, after a couple of years, I realized that's not really the best way to practice medicine abroad. You actually need to make sure that you have established health systems that you're practicing within, so that they can continue to provide services, and so that the healthcare is sustainable and long-term. And so when I came back to the United States, I went to Johns Hopkins to learn a little bit about how this was in fact practiced. So this was in 2003. I went to Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and focused my concentration on international health. And that's when I learned, you need to, like I said, be with a group or establish relationships with other people in spaces that actually give you the opportunity to continue to provide a continuum of care. So after that period of time, I think after Hopkins was Lesotho, where I'm not sure if you're gonna ask me another question as it relates to that, but that was the start of my interest in global health. Pitt was the foundation for it. And then I was able to secure different pathways on my own. These things hadn't existed before, but I was able to find my own pathway to what then became an extensive, actually, global health career. And I can tell you a little bit more details about Lesotho if you'd like.
Yes, actually, Dr. Dudley, that was my next question. So please tell us about your time in Lesotho, and also how it impacted your practice once you returned to the US.
Yeah, so Lesotho was after I had finished my degree in public health. I realized that I could join a group that was practicing sustainable care. It's called the Baylor Pediatric and Age Initiative, and it was the first of its kind. It was founded by a tremendous leader who actually saw the need for pediatric HIV care in sub-Saharan Africa, gathered up 54 pediatricians, just regular general pediatricians like myself, brought us down to Houston, trained us very specifically in an intensive program about how to care and treat patients with pediatric HIV, and in addition, all of the other diseases that opportunistic infections that actually come along with it. And then we were set out across several different countries in Africa. I had absolutely no idea where Lesotho was before I actually went there. I didn't even know that where that country had existed in that space. But I quickly learned a lot about the Mountain Kingdom, is what they call it. It's a beautiful country with even more beautiful people. It's the only place in Africa where, well, it's the second place in Africa where it snows. It used to snow on Mount Kilimanjaro. I'm not sure if it's still snowing there now with the climate change, but Lesotho still receives snow. They have a ski slope. It's like one lift, but they do. It's a beautiful place, but with that beauty actually also comes some treachery. So that means that people live in far outreaching spaces where they're unable to secure healthcare. And so they're in a resource limited kind of setting. Lesotho also at the time had the highest disparity between high income and low income people, which also set up the conditions for a terrible condition for HIV to thrive in. And so at the time that I went there, 1 in 4 people were infected with HIV, and the children were not being treated at all because we at the time did not have medications in sub-Saharan Africa that could be administered to children. Children normally take liquid medicines, and there weren't any liquid formulations available for children in sub-Saharan Africa. It was fortunate that in the beginning, we actually taught them how to swallow pills. We taught 3-year-olds how to swallow pills. And so if I ever have a kid coming in telling me, an 18-year-old saying, I can't swallow a pill, or, an older child, I tell them, yes, you can, and we're going to help you get through it. And this is the way that you do it. I think that leads into your other question in terms of like, what did I learn from lessons learned there versus here is there's a lot of differences in the way we perceive things in the United States versus other countries. For example, there is a thing called now and now. When you say, what's that? Now and now. So now means if you go and tell a nurse, I need you to come here now, that's a couple, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. If I say, I need you to come here now, they understand that that's an emergency. Our whole concept of emergency was completely different because every child that came into me to see me at the time looked like it was an emergency. There were dehydration and these kids that travel for miles and miles from these mountainous regions, and they were sometimes having difficulty breathing. And those were in the United States, those would have been perceived as urgent emergencies, act on them right away. But there, where the resources were limited and you only had certain things that you were able to do in the first place, those things became, there was a spectrum of what things then became emergencies. Even more important than that, though, I think was the way that patients actually viewed the healthcare system. And this is a lesson that we could learn in the United States from our neighbors in Lesotho, is even after a grandmother who would carry her 12-year-old malnourished child, because the mother of that child had already passed away, so the grandmother's taking care of them, had passed away from HIV, so now the grandmother's taking care of them, would place the child on her back, walk down from the mountains to our centralized clinic in Maseru, which is the capital city of Lesotho, with this child near death. And we would do our best to save that child. We would do our best to resuscitate that child. And even sometimes we were successful, but more times we were not in the very beginning. And when we were not successful, I was so touched and so moved by the way that the parents or the grandparents actually would still thank us. They would come, they would look in our eyes, and they would tell us, thank you. They were so appreciative of the fact that we tried. And I think that's a lesson that we could learn here in the United States about humility and about gratefulness and about taking care of each other. I think in this last year of the pandemic, we actually started to learn that lesson. And I really hope going forward that we actually hold on to it, that we don't have short attention spans and forget about all those lessons that we learned about being grateful for everyone and realizing that everyone has a valuable role to play in this life that we're living.
Thank you, Dr. Dudley. That is a wonderful story. I've been to Africa twice, but never to that region of Africa. So now you've actually inspired me to go to different parts of the continent because it is vast and it is diverse and it is equally as beautiful in all parts of the continent. You said that you got your inspiration for global health at the University of Pittsburgh. Are you still working in global health now that you've returned to the United States?
Well, here's what I learned. I would say yes and no, right? So I actually work currently in a center that actually has a lot of immigrant health, right? So we have lots of patients that are from El Salvador or Peru or a lot of South American, Guatemala, a lot of South American countries that are coming and settling here in Washington, D.C. And so we take care of a lot of those patients. And I've actually done that throughout my career, taking care of a lot of immigrant health issues. Although, but here's what I would say about global health. Global health is local health in terms of there are resource limited settings everywhere. And that's actually what brought me back to Washington, D.C. When I came to Washington, D.C., the area that I was practicing in had a 90% Medicaid patient population. And the resources that we had to deliver them services were truly limited. And so I like to position myself in places, no matter what part of the world that we're in spaces where people need me and they have limited access to healthcare providers. And so that's what actually in the end ended up bringing me back to DC. I'm not opposed to going back over seas and doing global health in the traditional sense and in other spaces. People in other countries don't consider global health. Only the United States considers global health. People in other countries consider health, right? They don't think of it the same way that we do. And so anywhere where I'm needed, that's where I would be happy to go.
Dr. Dudley, how would you inspire the next generation of physicians that are interested in public health, immigrant health, global health? I guess the question really is, where do you see the next need?
Whew, that's a good question. I think one of the things that we need to do with educating all of folks that are interested in public health is making sure that we are addressing issues that are local. Once again, I'll say everything is local, and helping them to understand that they don't necessarily need to kind of move into a space that's outside of the area that they see. Kind of look around you, identify what are the things that you need to care for in your own communities, and then try to gain understanding and buy-in from those communities to help to service them. I can tell you, I've been on, I don't know, half a dozen now calls from networks. I did a PBS piece on the PBS NewsHour about vaccine hesitancy and COVID. And I can tell you that a lot of people actually need us right now as public health professionals to communicate to them that we're listening to them, that we see them, and that we're going to be partners in their healthcare. It's one thing to come in and say, we need to do this, and this, right? It's another thing to actually get buy-in from the people that you're serving, that whether you're in locally or globally, getting buy-in from the people that you're serving, understanding what their needs are, and then meeting them where their needs are. And so that's kind of what I would tell the next group of people who want to go into public health or any form of service, is to make sure that you are listening first and then acting second.
That's wonderful, Dr. Dudley. I think that advice would serve anyone well, no matter what their career path is. Now I'd like to shift and think about current student athletes at the University of Pittsburgh. We would hope that this would be viewed at least by the track and field athletes, but all these track and field, all the athletes at the University of Pittsburgh will benefit from your experience. In my role, I often talk to student athletes and I try to get them help in navigating their career path. And I tell them things like, sometimes you can work backwards. First think about the career and then think about the education and training that you need to take advantage of that career, as opposed to thinking about it in the traditional forward way of after high school, choose a college, choose a major, and choose a career. That's my best advice for student athletes, is to work backwards. What are the words of advice you have for today's student athletes?
I would say that my best advice probably actually, like I said in the beginning, actually came from you and your cadre of athletes that actually were my teammates. I learned at Pitt, this is the most important and valuable lesson I think that I learned at Pitt. I learned how to be a leader, but more importantly, I learned how to be a follower. And so for in every step of my career, I was a leader and I also followed. When I told you the story about being in Lesotho, one of the things that a lot of those pediatricians wanted to do right away was take on all these new projects. Really what we all needed to do was just take care of the project at hand. The goal at hand was to care and treat children with pediatric HIV. And so you have to kind of take yourself out of your thoughts and kind of focus your thoughts on what the goal is. And so at that space, I was a follower. I wasn't leading people to do X, Y, or Z. I was following the directions of our administrator, and our administrator's goals were to deliver pediatric HIV care and treatment to patients. And so in that space, I was a follower who then in other different areas in the country, I was a leader. So I would implore all of our student athletes to learn while you're here at Pitt, not only how to lead, but equally important, how to follow. I think I learned that lesson too. It was solidified when I went to Hopkins. At Johns Hopkins, they force you to go into teams. And I think at that time, by this time now, I don't even know how old I am, but I'm way past young. I'm in my 30s probably when I'm at Hopkins. And I think, you know what, I can do this project. You give me an assignment, I can do this project all by myself, just like that, right? Like if I have 15 other people or 5 other people in this group, it's just going to slow me down. But what I learned from Hopkins is that if I did the product by myself, it would be okay. But when you actually get the help of your teammates, when you actually have influence and input from other people, the product is 10 times better. It may take a little longer, it may cut back on some efficiencies, but the product itself becomes that much better. And that's one thing that was solidified at Johns Hopkins, where I got my master's in public health. But it started at Pitt, where I learned how to be a good teammate. So learning how to be a good leader and learning how to be, more importantly, a good follower is the advice that I would give to all the student athletes at Pitt right now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dudley. This has been an amazing time to spend with you and reconnect with my captain and former teammate and friend for life. I would like to ask you one last opportunity, Dr. Dudley, to tell us a little bit about how you met your wife.
Thank God I asked for one last opportunity, because when I was awarded the esteemed Panther Award at the ceremonies last year, I completely thanked everyone in the room except for my wife. So this is my opportunity to thank her, because clearly without her support, I would not actually be where I am today. We met each other in Lesotho. So we met each other overseas, and I knew right away that she was the kind of person that was committed to caring for people in a way that was outside of herself. She always would allow people to call her cell phone. Back in the day, they had to text. She would get texts at any hour of the evening because she was available and accessible. And she's one of the people who I look up to. She's one of the people who teaches me how to be a follower and a leader in our relationship. So I would say not only is that lead and follow valuable advice in your career, but it may also be a valuable advice in your private lives as well. So I want to thank her, and in addition to thanking my family, who have been with me now, are still with me now, and have been with me throughout my entire life. I'd like to thank all of my teammates, not only the teammates that I was physically there with, but the people who came before me, Calvin Holmes, those guys, George Eiffel, all the guys that Roger Kingdom, Lee McCrae, all those guys that came before me and women that came before me, and all of my teammates that are there at Pitt right now. I'd like to thank you for carrying on the legacy under the leadership of Coach Webb. So I want to thank you so much. I want to thank the AV team for all the hard work that they're doing as well. So thank you, Allison, for bringing me back to a happy home. And thank you, Pitt. We want to make sure that when we come down there that we are able to close it out in the way that we always do. And Allison, if you want to close it out with me. 1, 2, 3. Hail
to Pitt!